There is a security deadline arriving on your Windows PC this month, and depending on which corner of the internet you have been reading, you have either heard nothing about it at all or you have heard a wildly exaggerated version that makes it sound like your computer is going to stop working entirely. Neither extreme is accurate. What is actually happening on June 24, 2026 is the expiration of a secure boot certificate that Microsoft issued back in 2011, and understanding exactly what that means, what it does not mean, and what you should actually do about it is far more useful than either panicking or ignoring it completely. Let us walk through the real story, because the actual details are genuinely interesting even without the doom and gloom. To understand why this certificate expiration matters at all, you first need to understand what Secure Boot actually does. And why it exists on virtually every PC sold since around 2012. Secure Boot is a feature built into your computer's UEFI firmware, which is the modern replacement for the old BIOS that used to control your PC's startup process. When your computer powers on, before Windows or any other operating system even begins loading, Secure Boot checks the digital signatures on the boot loader and other early startup components to verify they come from a trusted source. If something malicious has tried to insert itself into that startup chain, like a rootkit or a bootkit that loads before your antivirus software even has a chance to run, Secure Boot is designed to refuse to let it execute. This is genuinely important security technology that closes off an entire category of attacks that were historically very difficult to detect and remove once they had taken hold. The trust that Secure Boot relies on is established through cryptographic certificates, and those certificates are not permanent. Just like the SSL certificate on a website or the certificate on your phone, Secure Boot certificates have expiration dates built into them when they are created. Microsoft's original certificate, known formally as the Microsoft Corporation KEKCA 2011, was created with a 15-year validity period, and that 15 years runs out specifically on June 24, 2026. Microsoft has known this expiration was coming for years, obviously, since the date was set when the certificate was created, and the company has been replacing the aging 2011 certificates with new 2023 dated certificates that remain valid until 2038, giving the industry more than a decade of runway before this conversation needs to happen again. Here is the most important fact in this entire story, the one that directly contradicts the dramatic framing you may have seen circulating online. The expiration of this certificate does not stop your computer from booting. Microsoft has stated this explicitly and repeatedly, including during live Ask Microsoft Anything sessions specifically held to address enterprise IT administrator questions about this transition. Devices that have not received the updated 2023 certificates will continue to start and operate normally, and standard Windows updates will continue to install without interruption. What changes is something more narrow and technical. Devices running only on the expired 2011 certificate will no longer be able to receive new security protections for the early boot process going forward, including future updates to the Windows Boot Manager or new entries added to the revocation list that blocks known malicious bootloaders. The Linux side of this story is where the most exaggerated and inaccurate rumors have been spreading, so let us address it directly with the actual facts. Linux distributions that support Secure Boot, including Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Fedora, Ubuntu, and others, use something called a shim bootloader that Microsoft signs on their behalf. This signing process is how Linux is able to boot on PCs with Secure Boot enabled even though Linux is not made by Microsoft. The shim that is currently installed on your Linux system, if you have one running, was signed using that same 2011 certificate that is expiring. The critical detail that the panic-inducing headlines consistently get wrong is this: a shim that is already signed and already installed on your system will continue to boot successfully after June 24, 2026, for as long as the corresponding public certificate remains present in your system's firmware. The expiration only affects Microsoft's ability to sign brand new shim files going forward using that specific key. It does not retroactively invalidate shims that were already signed and are already working on your machine. Red Hat, which maintains one of the most widely used enterprise Linux distributions, has already addressed this transition proactively and published clear guidance for their users. The company released new versions of the shim bootloader that are signed with both the old 2011 certificate and the new 2023 certificate simultaneously, which Red Hat calls a dual-signed shim. This means the new shim will boot successfully on any system, regardless of whether that system has the old certificate, the new certificate, or both present in its firmware database. Red Hat explicitly confirmed that systems with the 2011 certificate already enrolled will continue to boot after the expiration date without any problem. This dual signing approach, which other major Linux distributions have implemented in similar ways, is precisely the kind of careful engineering response that prevents the dramatic failure scenario that some sensationalized headlines have suggested is coming. For Windows users specifically, the rollout of the new 2023 certificates has been happening automatically and gradually for many users already. Microsoft began phased automatic updates for eligible devices starting with cumulative updates released in January 2026, and the company has been using a staged deployment process designed specifically to avoid breaking anything. Many Windows PCs manufactured since 2024 already shipped with the updated 2023 certificates built in from the factory, meaning a large and growing portion of the Windows installed base never needed to do anything manual at all. For devices running supported versions of Windows 10 or Windows 11 with automatic updates enabled and secure boot turned on, which describes the vast majority of consumer PCs, the certificate transition has been or will be handled automatically through the normal Windows update process without requiring any user intervention whatsoever. The situation becomes more genuinely complicated for a specific and relatively narrow category of devices, older hardware that has reached end of life from the manufacturer's perspective and is no longer receiving firmware updates. Some pre-2020 Windows PCs, according to analysis from hardware-focused outlets in early 2026, may never receive the firmware support needed to properly anchor the new 2023 certificates because the original manufacturer has stopped supporting that hardware model entirely. For these specific older devices, the practical consequence is not that the computer stops working, but that it will gradually fall further behind on receiving new boot-level security protections as Microsoft and the security community discover new threats and issue new protections that rely on the updated certificate infrastructure. This is a real and legitimate long-term security concern, but it is a gradual erosion of future protection rather than an immediate failure. Enterprise IT environments face a more involved transition process than typical home users, which is part of why Microsoft has published extensive documentation and tooling specifically for IT administrators managing large fleets of devices. Organizations need to inventory their devices to check certificate compliance status, verify with hardware manufacturers like Dell, HP, and Lenovo whether current firmware versions support the new certificates, and run pilot deployments before rolling changes out broadly across their environment. Virtual machine environments add another layer of complexity, since certificate updates for VMs are managed through the virtualized firmware rather than the guest operating system itself, requiring coordination between host-level patches and guest-level expectations. None of this enterprise complexity is relevant to a typical home user running a modern PC with automatic updates enabled, but it explains why this topic has generated so much detailed technical documentation from Microsoft, Red Hat, and other vendors over the past several months. If you want to actually check your own system status rather than relying on second-hand information, the process is straightforward for most Windows users. Microsoft has published a dedicated resource page that consolidates tools, guidance, and vendor-specific firmware update links for checking and managing your secure boot certificate status. For the overwhelming majority of home users running a reasonably current Windows PC with updates enabled, the honest and accurate answer is that you genuinely do not need to do anything manually, because the transition is designed to happen automatically in the background through normal Windows update mechanisms. If you are running notably older hardware, dual booting with Linux, or managing devices in any kind of enterprise or organizational context, taking the time to verify your specific certificate status using Microsoft's published tools is a reasonable and worthwhile precaution, but even in those cases the framing should be proactive maintenance rather than emergency crisis response. The broader lesson from this entire situation is one about how technology news and rumors spread in ways that often distort routine, well-managed technical transitions into dramatic crisis narratives that generate more attention than the underlying facts justify. A 15-year certificate reaching its planned expiration date, with years of advance notice, coordinated responses. From every major affected vendor including Microsoft and Red Hat, automatic update mechanisms already rolling out the fix, and explicit and repeated reassurance from the companies involved that existing systems will continue functioning normally, is not the stuff of an apocalyptic headline. It is the stuff of competent, boring, well-executed infrastructure maintenance, which is exactly what you want from the security systems protecting your computer. The version of this story that deserves your attention is not that Windows is killing Linux or that your PC will stop working on a specific date. It is the quieter and more accurate story of a planned security upgrade rolling out carefully across billions of devices worldwide, with genuine but narrow concerns limited mainly to old, unsupported hardware and complex enterprise environments rather than the typical home user. So what should you actually do before and after June 24, 2026? If you are running a reasonably modern Windows PC with automatic updates turned on, the honest answer is almost nothing beyond your normal good security habits. Keep your system updated, keep Secure Boot enabled if it already is, and do not go out of your way to disable it during this transition period since Windows cannot properly update the certificates if Secure Boot is turned off. If you dual boot with Linux, check that your distribution has released or is releasing a dual-sign shim update, which the major distributions including Red Hat, Fedora, and Ubuntu have already done or are actively rolling out. If you are running notably old hardware, particularly anything from before 2020, it is worth checking your manufacturer's support page to see whether firmware updates supporting the new certificates are available for your specific model. And if all of this still leaves you uncertain, Microsoft's dedicated Secure Boot resource page is the most reliable place to get device-specific guidance rather than relying on whatever dramatic headline happened to show up in your social media feed.